By the Executive Director from Freedom of Religion South Africa, Michael Swain. Good morning, sir, and thank you for coming through to our studios.
Good morning, Jonathan and Rachel. It's great to be with Breakfast with Friends.
Good to have you.
Very, very good to have you. So, Michael, it's important for us to talk about this. There are some disturbing international trends that are eroding the rights of parents. What rights are they eroding? They're eroding the rights of parents to pass on their faith, their values, their belief systems to their children. So we're not seeing this yet in South Africa, but we're definitely seeing it abroad. And this is at the heart of your religious freedom. And this is why we need to talk to Michael Swain about this topic. So what is the major trend that you are seeing that is emerging, and why should parents be concerned?
Well, we actually are seeing it in South Africa, which is very concerning. Parental rights are core to religious freedom. It is literally your right to pass on what you believe to your children. And that's never really been an issue until very recently. And obviously, you as a parent, when you have a little child, that child is essentially very open to whatever input that child receives. And of course, therefore, it's very critical that your right as a parent is protected, because otherwise what will happen is that somebody else will put their views and their values into your child. Yeah. You know, Aristotle said, give me a child until the age of 7 and I'll show you the man. And of course, what we're seeing, and I think this is really the concerning trend, is that there is an increasing intervention, particularly by the state, perhaps based upon whatever ideology it may be, to actually intervene in this whole, let's say, current political woke construct where you have an oppressed, which is of course the child, and an oppressor, which is the parent.
Sure.
And so they actually talk about this unequal power dynamic within a family relationship. And of course, where that takes place, then somebody has to come in and support the oppressed, which is the child. And so you're seeing children's rights now being put in competition with parents' rights, whereas in fact, obviously, what children's rights should be is to be protected by the parents.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not to be taken away from the parents and somehow put in competition with them.
Sure.
And of course, the big area where we're seeing this is unfortunately in the area of education around sex and sexuality and gender and that type of thing. And that is very much goes against the grain of many, many more conservative valued parents. And that, of course, ultimately will fundamentally affect the foundations of any society that we live in, because family is the basic building block of society. And the relationships that you form and how those relationships then play out will impact the society that you live in. And we take for granted that we live in a society that we do, without remembering that, of course, we are literally building and enjoying what has been built by generations and generations and generations who have come before us, who typically have had much more conservative traditional values. And that's why we have these stable societies. But cut in, divide parents from their children in terms of the views and values that you pass on, and there's actually no knowing what type of society will be a consequence of that. So it's very, very serious. That was when I was in Brazil a couple of weeks ago. I think I mentioned at the G20 Interfaith Forum. That's something that we really put very front and center on the agenda for discussions, to get the rights of children in the right perspective again, so that they actually are obviously protected by their parents primarily, and only in the most extreme instances of abuse or neglect or something, only then should the state step in, and then only so that they can actually restore the family relationship. That would be the ideal.
Sure.
That would be the ideal indeed. But some really scaring points that you have put through as well, Michael. But you said that there are international trends which are often a clear indication of what we can expect to face right here in South Africa, which is really, really scary. Can you give us some examples of them?
Yes, look, I think, first of all, let me start off by saying that when we talk about gender dysphoria, we're talking about some children who are obviously very deeply confused and really suffering in a real sense. And of course, we must be obviously very sensitive to them. They must be protected. They must be cared for. They mustn't be bullied and what have you. But this is now tended towards more of an ideological position that is taken. And that is where the challenges arise. And of course, particularly when parents actually aren't aware of what's going on in schools. So let's look at some American examples first. There is currently a court case underway in Colorado where the school failed to inform parents of their policy of assigning students who were going on school trips to accommodation which corresponded with whatever gender they decided that they were. And one parent was very upset, I think understandably, to find that their 11-year-old girl was put in the same bed as a biological boy who claimed to be a girl. Similarly, an 11-year-old boy was on a camp, and the counselor, who was obviously supposed to be a man, actually turned out to be a woman and was also supervising the boy showering, for example. So, these are obviously situations where things get much more out of control. Now, we haven't seen that in this country, and I think that's important to say. But I think the reason we haven't seen it, primarily perhaps, is because we actually don't have that type of ideology present, sufficiently entrenched in our schools. But I do believe that the trend is there. Maybe just one more thing, which I think is very concerning, that there was a 14-year-old girl who was recommended by the school to see a sex counseling therapist, who immediately started to recommend that she went on to hormone blockers and
14 years of age.
Transition. And they didn't tell the parents that in the school context, they were referring to their daughter as a boy using her male name or what have you. And of course, once you start baking in that psychological shift, you're actually almost on an irreversible pattern in the course. So these are things that are happening internationally, certainly in the US. There are more examples in Europe, by the way. Which
of course,
we can touch on too.
Well, we don't have a lot of time now, but it's so important for us to talk about this because, it is about understanding. It is about parents being aware of what's going on. And very often we as South Africans, we kind of have the approach of saying, oh, well, but this is happening, in other countries. The fact that the world has shrunk is a reality. Your children are watching international influencers, be it on whatever social platform it is, and they are being exposed to those things. So that's why we're having this conversation, ladies and gentlemen. And this is why it is so important. As we wrap up now, Michael, for parents who are concerned, who are hearing this and saying, I've got to do something. And I really, really hope that there will be more parents that say that. What can parents realistically do?
Well, the one thing which we know is happening here in South Africa is we have this early childhood education toolkit that basically is teaching teachers or training teachers to bring transgender ideology into pre-primary and primary schools. So if you have a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old, it's very likely that your daughter or son are being asked what's your preferred name, what's your preferred pronoun, which toilet would you like to use? If your mummy and daddy are telling you that there's only men and women, they're harming you and holding you back in life. If you were looking, we're not going to use anymore in pre-primary schools in South Africa. This is what the training says, he and she, not in pre-primary schools. We're only going to use they and them because, as their toolkit points out, the training now teaches our teachers today, right now, you cannot tell whether somebody's a boy or a girl just by looking at them. That's what they're teaching little kids.
Crazy.
So if you don't like
in
that,
South Africa, folks,
in South Africa today.
This is back home,
So if you don't like that, we have on the 4SA website on our front page an opportunity where you can have your say, and you can write to the Department of Basic Education and say that this is not something that you would actually want your little 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old to be taught. Obviously, if you do and you're happy with it, then sit and say nothing and do nothing. But again, this is a value system. This is an ideology that is being taught. It's not an educational issue. And therefore, I think very importantly, parents who value their parental rights to pass on their faith, their views, their values, their beliefs to their children, it's time to stand up. Because if you don't stand up, then essentially these things will simply happen, and then you will be left with the consequences. And by the way, so will your children.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah,
Sure.
it's very scary.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the time is now. This is what we need to do. We need to stand up. We need to stand together. And then also to understand that an organization like 4SA, who are advocating and fighting for the religious freedom of everybody who lives in South Africa's rights, they also need your support, not just your prayer support, not just you writing an email, but they need you to put your money where your mouth is. So would you consider looking at that and supporting 4SA? They do amazing work. And I mean, it's incredible. They're a team of 2 people taking on government, taking on bills, taking on legislation.
This is our 10th anniversary, Jonathan. We've been doing this for
Congratulations.
10 years.
Amazing.
So please click that donate now button on our website. We need the support. We need to expand our team. There's
Yeah.
too much happening in this world for us to not have the sufficient defense that we need to actually hold things at bay.
And I want to say that you might feel that you're at the end of your life, your kids are already adults, and you're kind of like, well, it doesn't really affect me. Think of the future
Exactly.
generations. Think of your grandkids. Think of my grandkids, for that matter. I don't have grandkids yet, not nearly old enough, but they're coming, hopefully, God willing, in the next 20 years or whatever. But just let's do something. Let's do something.
Yeah.
Michael Swain, great to chat to you.
And also, thank you, Michael, for the past 10
Yeah.
years. You've been fighting for this. This is big, big, big topics, things that we never would have known about if it wasn't for you. So thank you to you and your team.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome. 4SA is where you can go, 4sa.org.za. So 4SA, FORSA.org.za to find out more, to sign up for their information, or to make a donation.